Thank you for the introduction. Indeed, LPWAN endpoints will need energy harvesting to achieve scale. That's exactly what I want you to be convinced of when you will be leaving this room in about 30 minutes. And to do so, I will first show you the problem and show you how big the problem can potentially be. And then I'll show you how energy harvesting can actually solve this issue. To start with, I would like to start with this graph that you all have access to. It comes from the 2017 end-of-year report of the LoRa Alliance, and it shows the total LPWA shipments year on year. I didn't show you this slide because I want to show you the nice year-on-year growth of the LP1 market, but because I wanted to calculate the number of devices that will be out there deployed on the field in 2020 and 2025 for you to realize how big this number is. And you see that if you've got only 80 million devices that were deployed in 2015, we're going to have more than 2 billion devices out there by 2025. And the real question now is, how do we supply those devices? Nowadays, there is a clear trend towards battery-powered devices, and there are different reasons for that. The first one is some devices that are deployed are just too far from the grid to be supplied with an electrical cord, or other ones are just too mobile to be supplied with a cord. That's the case for wearables, smart agriculture sensors, IoT-enabled retail sensors. Another reason is that moving from electrical cord power to battery-powered devices, you save about 80% of your installation costs. So no doubt that when your network is scaling, you will want to save those costs and move to battery-powered devices. Now let's come back to the numbers that I presented to you earlier. Let's have a look at how many batteries we will have to replace by 2025 if we consider a 5 years battery lifetime. We will have to replace around 600 million batteries per year. That means I made the calculation. That means 50,000 people working 8 hours a day, 15 minutes per battery, just to replace batteries. And if we now take a little bit of altitude and look at the whole IoT market, those numbers become absolutely outrageous. So definitely we need to find a solution. We need to think further than just the installation costs. We need to think about the future. This problem raises two questions. The first one is the environmental issue of all those batteries that will end up in the environment. And the other one is the problem of the maintenance cost of your devices that will be deployed. So first, the impact on the environment. I'm not an idealist, and I never saw one customer coming to us saying that they want to implement energy harvesting just for the sake of environment. But even though it's nice to see that if you take the decision to implement energy harvesting for financial reasons, there will be a very positive impact on the environment that will come as a plus. The problem with the environment is that for each battery that you will replace, either because the battery is empty, or worse, before it's empty because this battery replacement is all part of a maintenance plan, you will find heavy metals like mercury, lead, cadmium, and nickel, which are very difficult to store safely and very challenging to recycle. If we look at the maintenance cost issues, the biggest part of the cost of replacing a battery nowadays is not the battery itself. It's not the cost of the battery. It's the labor time and the labor cost, and the time that the person will spend getting to the object and replacing the battery. So if we look at, there is a big impact on the location of the object for that reason. So if we look at indoor applications, we can consider that we've got around tens of dollars to replace a battery. If we now consider outdoor applications with quite easily reachable batteries, like cattle trackers, it's going to cost you tens to hundreds of dollars to replace one battery. And if we look at this specific case there, a bridge, if you need to send someone to replace the battery of a sensor on top of the pillar of that bridge, I bet it's going to cost you a few $1,000s. So the problem is huge. Nowadays, the battery management costs of your endpoints already account for more than 40% of the total cost of your endpoint. And this cost is proportional, of course, to the number of nodes that you have, to the labor time and rates to replace the battery, to the battery cost, and to the battery disposal cost. Now, the problem is that the trend is definitely to move a lot of processing and security features into the endpoint rather than leave them to the cloud, because we don't want to have thousands of data to be sent to the cloud and to be treated in the cloud and that have to be sent through the radio. What we want is to really send useful information. So processing is moving to the endpoint. So the power consumption of the node is increasing. So the speed at which you will have to replace the batteries is also increasing drastically. Which brings me to the most important impact of all that actually gathers all of them, which is the total cost of ownership of your device. That's what matters at the end of the day. What the total cost of ownership principle tells you is that the only thing that matters is how much your device will have cost you at its end of life. And it makes a lot of sense to invest a little bit more in hardware if this investment is reimbursed by a further decrease, a bigger decrease in the maintenance costs of your device. And that finally brings me to energy harvesting. Energy harvesting indeed increases the cost of your hardware. You need to invest a little bit of money to implement energy harvesting in your device. And this investment will be proportional to how much energy you need to get and the kind of environment in which you are. The PV cell will obviously be smaller outdoor than indoor. It's going to be lower cost. You can use simple amorphous silicon, while indoor you're going to need to use more expensive and more specific PV cells. But in most cases, this investment is really reasonable. And the good thing is that by implementing that, what you will do is that you will either increase the battery lifetime of your device, which means you will have to replace the battery less often, or you will even make your device completely autonomous, which means you will not have to replace the battery at all. This, as a result, sensibly reduces the total cost of ownership of your device. And I think the best way to convince you is to show some applications. Here I've got a cattle tracker. The principle of this cattle tracker is that it works once per hour. It makes a GPS acquisition and sends the data through LoRa. The average power consumption of this cattle tracker is 750 microwatts. The conditions of the calculation I made are the cow is half of the time indoor at 400 lux and half of the time outdoor at 8,000 lux. So I considered 4,200 lux as an average. I considered that there is light only 8 hours a day and that I had to buy a PV cell that will make the system fully autonomous, which means I have to generate 750 microwatts in those conditions. I also consider that one battery replacement is $20, which is on the low end of the battery replacement costs that I presented earlier. And what we see is that using a simple AA batteries, at the end of the lifetime, after 20 years, I spent almost $550 just to replace batteries. While with energy harvesting, I had to replace the battery twice because I considered that the lifetime of the rechargeable element is 10 years. So I have to replace the battery only when the lifetime of the battery is over. So you see that you save a lot of money because at the end of the day, you spend only $50. So it's totally worth it implementing energy harvesting in that case. Now, if I move away from LoRa, I take another example, which is a Bluetooth beacon. You know those Bluetooth beacons? They're all over the place. They're supplied with a coin cell, quite small. The battery lifetime of these Bluetooth beacons is 1 year. It consumes around 85 microwatts. So let's have a look at what energy harvesting can do for this application. This time I considered I'm indoor at 400 lux, still having light 8 hours a day. I'm buying a PV cell that generates 85 microwatts, and a battery replacement costs $10. I'm indoor, it's quite easy to reach, so that's possible. If I don't want to replace the battery, I just throw away the beacon, which is about $10, and I put another one. So that's fair enough. After 20 years, my beacon will have cost me around $250 when using coin cells, while only $25 using energy harvesting. I think that's another good reason to move to energy harvesting in that scenario. So at the end of the day, I understand that it's possible to close your eyes to this problem when you deploy 10 sensors, 100 sensors. But with the scaling networks that we observe, we tend to indeed install hundreds or thousands of sensors where we used to install only tens before. The problem is really growing, and when thinking about the next generation of your devices, or when going in full-scale production of your devices, I believe that the total cost of ownership of your batteries will really become, and has to become, a key decision point. The good news in all this is that for those who will have decided to implement energy harvesting, the first good news is that energy is all around us. You can gather and harvest energy from sun, from artificial indoor lighting, from wind, from water flow, from heat, from vibrations. So I know only a few applications where you actually cannot find a source of energy around your device that you can actually harvest to make it autonomous. The other good news is that EPs, the company I'm the CEO of, developed a whole portfolio of energy harvesting PMICs to help you implement energy harvesting in your devices. We have solutions for photovoltaic, the 10940 and the 10941. Those devices are able to cold start to charge a supercapacitor that is fully empty with only 3 microwatts of input power and 380 millivolts on the PV cell. The 10940 has been nominated for the Electron d'Or 2017, so that's a small cocorico. We also have a solution for thermoelectric energy harvesting. The solution we have is able to cold start at only 50 millivolts and to harvest all the power provided by the TEG up to 5 volts. That means you've got a range of 100 times between the lowest temperature gradient that you can harvest from to the highest one. We also have solutions for vibration energy harvesting, and we also have solutions for RF energy harvesting at different frequency bands, 868 megahertz, 915 megahertz, 2.4, 45 gigahertz. And we are able to cold start at minus 18.8 dBm, which gives a distance of about 10 meters from the source. And we go up to 5 dBm, which brings us to a few centimeters from the source. If we look at what the PMICs have to do for you, well, actually the PMIC is between the source and your battery. And what you want is to optimize the power transfer, the energy transfer between your source and your battery. And the features of the PMIC, the performances of the PMIC that will impact that are the PMIC conversion efficiency, the PMIC leakage current, the ability of your PMIC to transfer small and high power levels. That's very important when you've got devices that spend most of the time indoor and that for a few seconds or a few minutes a day will see the sunlight. You want to get that light. And you also have the MPPT, so the maximum power point tracker performances. So that's the algorithm that will make sure that your PMIC will actually extract all the power which is available and provided by the source. If we look at the EP's PMIC's performances, we've got the highest conversion efficiency on the market, up to 94% conversion efficiency. We've got the lowest leakage current, only 400 nanoamps from a battery charge at 4 volts. We are capable of harvesting power from 3 microwatts up to 500 milliwatts with the same device without any impact on the conversion efficiency. And we've got the fastest MPPT evaluation. So a few takeaways before we actually move to Q&A. The first one is that despite the initial investment that energy harvesting is going to require, it's going to, once implemented, lower the TCO of your device by such an amount that it's really worth implementing it. And as a plus, you will save the environment. So I'm totally convinced today, and I hope you are as well, know that energy harvesting is the enabler of IoT applications at scale. And finally, don't forget that EP has developed a portfolio of devices to help you implement energy harvesting in your devices. I will be walking around for the next 3 days, so do not hesitate to come to me. We can discuss about energy harvesting and your specific use case. And you can also visit the website, www.eps.com. Thank you.
So does anyone ask a question about the presentation we just saw? Okay, I'm coming to you. Wait.
Well, you were talking about the lifetime of the battery, but there's also a supercapacitor for energy harvesting. So what's the lifetime of the supercapacitor? Because that's degrading in time as well.
Yeah, so the most important thing is that each application is different. And for each application, you will have to consider selecting properly your PV cell and your storage element. Some storage elements, like supercapacitors, can last up to 15 years. Of course, it will degrade over time, but honestly, 10 years for a supercapacitor is something possible. If you want to use a lithium-ion batteries, indeed, you will mostly be around 4 to 5 years battery lifetime, which still makes sense if before moving to energy harvesting, your device was lasting for 6 months or a year on a primary battery. So it really depends where you come from, what's the power consumption of your device, and where you want to get.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I have a question about the storage. What do you use? Because LiPo, I think, at cold temperatures, you have big voltage drops. What do you usually use then for outdoor LoRa devices as the storage?
We use supercapacitors. Sometimes we put a LiPo4 in parallel with a supercapacitor.
Okay.
That will be able to provide a peak current.
Okay.
Yeah, for outdoor applications, that's a good question, because for outdoor application, you need to select components that will resist at -20 or -40 degrees.
And supercap, I'm not an expert. Supercaps, you have no problem.
-40.
-40, okay.
Yeah, typical supercaps -20, and some special series down to -40.
Okay, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Does anyone else ask questions? Or can we move on to the lunch break then? Food. No more questions? Well then, thank you for your attention. And the next presentation is at 1:35, I think. So it's going to be microchip workshops presentation. So come around if you're interested. Thank you.
Thank you.